Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of RPMbassy. Today I'm going to be talking about an album from a band that have sort of started to just get their flowers recently after like a 3-decade-long career, and a band that I think a lot of people are still at the very least on the fence about, if not still detest. It's cool to hate this band and it always has been, but as I say, they've kind of been getting a little bit more recognition in the past few years, and I'm personally glad to see it. I've been a happy, proud flag bearer for this band for, well, over 20 years at this point. And the album I'm talking about and the band I'm talking about is Limp Bizkit's Significant Other from 1999. So this is their second album, and I think this is kind of the one that really sort of sets them off as kind of almost like the figureheads of the nu metal movement for the late 90s. Up until this point you had Korn and Deftones and some other slightly less big bands kind of stirring up the scene in the sort of early to mid 90s, but this kind of really, it's kind of like the dawning of the new millennium as far as nu metal goes, and it's I think this is kind of like the pinnacle of the movement as a whole. Like 1999 to 2000, that kind of feels where that's sort of where it really peaked in terms of the mainstream popularity. You had stuff like obviously this album, you had stuff like Deftones' Around the Fur, you had the Korn album Follow the Leader, followed by Issues, like all really huge albums that kind of even today stand out as sort of albums that I think for a lot of people they look at them outside of the nu metal bubble in a way. I sort of mentioned this during the System of a Down review, if you saw that one, the way that people will almost like disregard the kind of the standard opinions of certain genres when it comes to particular albums, and certainly especially like Korn's Follow the Leader, that album kind of really has a kind of almost like cross-culture appeal. Like people don't care that it's meant to be like a quote-unquote cringe album or anything like that, but this, as I say, this is like, this was mainstream when it came out, and I mean, for good reason. As I say, I've always been a flag bearer for this band. I love everything they've done, and I think this is them sort of really honed in on their sound. So following the first album, $3 Bill Y'all, it came out a couple of years prior to this. That's a fantastic song or fantastic album, and obviously has some songs that really sort of catapulted them into stardom. You've got things like Sour and Counterfeit, but this is where it really pops off. I mean, just going from top to bottom, the sort of the big tracks on here are the big tracks, not only for the band but the genre as a whole. So you've got Nookie, Break Stuff, Rearranged, Don't Go Off Wandering, End Together Now, like all really huge songs for the band, and kind of again sort of highlighting a bit of that sort of crossover appeal that nu metal had. You End Together Now especially, you've got a collaboration on there from Method Man, and it kind of brings this kind of legitimacy to the music almost. It's like, oh, actually, you know what? There's a sick rapper on here. We're cool with this. But yeah, this album is pretty much non-stop bangers all the way through, and I love how every member of the band gets their moment to shine. And for a lot of people, I think Limp Bizkit is just kind of like, it's a dirty word for some people. They kind of just go, you know what, they're a nu metal band, it's cringe, it's trash, blah 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 blah, should have stayed in the 90s, etc etc. But when you dissect what makes this band the band, the culmination of the members and how they work together, you've got 4 incredibly talented musicians plus Fred Durst. So I personally really dig what Fred Durst does. I think versatility-wise, he's one of the best who's ever sort of been in, especially in that genre. But I think just as a rock vocalist in general, like, he can do cleans, he can rap, he can scream, he can do it all. And I think he has like there's kind of I don't want to call it like vulnerability, but there's like a level of like kind of honesty to the way he writes. Like, lyrically, the cards are kind of on the table all the time. I think perhaps some of that is like he maybe lacks tact, and so he just says what he's thinking. But the fact that, you know, there's no kind of like veiled messages in a lot of what he writes, actually, I kind of dig that. And as far as the performances themselves vocally go, I have zero problem with the way that he, like, his vocal technique, the way he, you know, approached the music. I think he fits perfectly for this band. Like, there could be no Limp Bizkit without Fred Durst in the band. And I think the members as a whole, you know, later on down the line, you had sort of members kind of coming in and leaving and stuff like that, and the periods of time where you didn't have the sort of core classic lineup were periods of time where the band definitely suffered. Like, there was a missing element, and I think they are kind of they are a set that you need to have complete. So as for the members, obviously Fred Durst, I mentioned, the vocalist. You've got Wes Borland, the guitarist, Sam Rivers, the bassist, John Otto, the drummer, and DJ Lethal, the turntablist, samplerist, etc., etc. You know, the classic nu metal edition, the guy in the back corner who's got a couple of decks and probably does some other stuff. But again, I think that in nu metal, it's kind of underappreciated in a lot of bands, especially when you look at a band like Deftones. Frank Delgado of Deftones, like, his contribution to that band is so underappreciated, and I think DJ Lethal is the same with Limp Bizkit. The way he approaches sampling and the atmospheres that he kind of builds in the background, like that, he in many ways is kind of like a second guitarist with like the way he will build out melodies and sounds to kind of really enhance a track. So very underappreciated as a DJ, but also as a member musically of the band. And then when you come to the other three, you've got John Otto and Sam Rivers, like the rhythm section, the drumming that John Otto has. He's so articulate. He's got such amazing ghost notes and like drum rolls. And again, I think because he was in this band, people never gave him a second look. But actually, like, the accuracy of his drumming is so on point, and it's very, very detailed for something that he could have easily gotten away with being just like a naff, like standard, like boom tish kind of drummer. But there's a lot of detail in here, and as I say, it's very articulate. It's really worth picking out the drum parts in particular. Sam Rivers, his bass playing, he's got a tendency to lean towards very particular bass lines, and I love his particular, it seems like a very big preference of his to kind of jump all across the fretboard on the bass. You know, he plays a lot in the upper register, so there are many times where he's actually kind of like almost performing as a lead instrument rather than just holding down bass notes. And again, it's like he's so underappreciated. Some of the bass lines on this as well are like some of my all-time favorite bass lines. Rearranged. If you haven't heard that song, I implore you to check out the song Rearranged. The bass line and the counterpoint of the guitar versus the bass line, like, it's genuinely like fantastic songwriting. I don't care what you think about the band, that bass line is excellent. It's a fantastic exercise in terms of rhythmic versus melodic approach, the sort of use of the repetition of the line to kind of like stabilize the track while still being a really important melodic component. And then Wes Borland, as I say, the guitarist, possibly one of the most underrated guitarists of all time. You know, you see these kind of like lists of best guitarists ever, and you get your Jimmy Pages and your Jimi Hendrixes and your Slashes and etc. etc. And I've seen a lot of those sorts of lists before where bands like Korn would have gotten a look in. You know, Brian Welch and James Schaefer would have been mentioned on these best guitarists of all time sort of lists because they were quite influential in terms of what heavy music would become in the 90s and onwards. But Wes Borland, I've seen lists where he gets completely snubbed, and thankfully it's not so big of an issue now. People are recognizing him for his talent. He is one of the best guitar bass writers of all time. Like, I do not care what you think. Like, he is so interesting and intriguing as a writer. He kind of eschews the standard approach of not just nu metal but any guitarist. You know, there's so many moments where he'll employ tapping techniques where no other guitarist would have thought to do that. He will have such an overwhelming amount of creativity, but also at other times he has this uncanny ability to just simplify everything down to just like the most core fundamental of the song. And that one in particular that I want to point out, that technique is on Break Stuff in Spades. Break Stuff is a riff. That is the song. It's a single riff. And I cannot stress this enough. It is, again, some of the most perfect songwriting. You don't need to have, you know, line after line after line of different riffs and different guitar lines and different chords and this and that. He's basically playing two chords for the same, in the same technique for the entire song, maybe here and there changing up the pacing and the rhythm. And to be able to fill out an entire song like that, it's this such a fantastic approach to songwriting where they understand what the song needs, and you know, will perhaps look over what that song may have caused at Woodstock, but you know, clearly that kind of music has an impact if they're able to do that sort of thing. Other than that, you've got stuff like Nookie, again, a massive single for the band, and again, an interesting approach to songwriting and guitar work. Wes Borland is using a 4-string modified Ibanez, like an old Art Star kind of guitar. He's basically modified it, so instead of it being a 6-string, it's a 4-string, and he's got a low F sharp, and we're talking what would be nowadays an 8-string standard low string, then a high F sharp, sort of what would be a standard E tuned up, and then a couple of other notes. I can't remember exactly what, but he's essentially playing like this weird kind of octave bass guitar combination sort of thing, but it's all to serve this riff. And again, it's like, as far as heaviness goes, like when you look at the low note in that song, like he was doing low Fs before Meshuggah were, again, like trailblazers in the metal genre as far as I'm concerned. Which is not to say that it's just all heaviness. You've got some fantastic melodic songs in here as well. Don't Go Off Wandering and No Sex in particular, really emotionally quite impactful songs. Don't Go Off Wandering, the guitar work on that, and the use of classical instruments. There's a lot of strings in there that really work very well for the track, and I kind of wish that had been released as a single. I don't think it ever sort of saw the light of day in a big wide release, but that very possibly is one of the best songs Limp Bizkit ever did. As I say, it's very emotionally impactful for you know what you could boil down to a rap metal band. Like that track is unreal. Really interesting use of chords, very quite depressing theme, and again it's that counterpoint of like the guitar versus the lyricism and the vocals. Everything serves its purpose so perfectly. I also want to mention the intro and the outro. Now, I presume this is sort of a DJ Lethal special almost. He sort of traditionally has had like a track on each album, but in outro especially, it's not really an ambient pad so much, but it's creepy. It's very creepy, and it sounds very evocative of this era if you're looking at it from a sort of hip hop and plunderism, electronic kind of perspective. The sort of weird phased out kind of, it is ambient, almost like spooky horror soundtrack kind of synthy feeling to it, with Fred's lyrics or vocals just very very low in the background. Yeah, again, like, it's an oddball track, and it serves so well to go with the rest of the album. You've got such a back and forth of simplicity, anger, intricacy, introspection, and then, you know, weird songs like that. And I genuinely, I implore you, this album is so good. If you've turned your nose up at it before because you had some preconceived notions of what Limp Bizkit were or are, I genuinely suggest just give it a chance. Don't think about what you have heard of Limp Bizkit or what you think you know about Limp Bizkit. Give it a try. If you don't like it, then fair enough. You know, it is nu metal. There is an element of it that isn't for everyone, but I think there is something bigger than just it being a nu metal album in this. I think it is one of the pinnacles of that genre and always will be. As for the vinyl release itself, just to quickly cover some bits and pieces. Nice insert there. So you've got all the members of the band. You've got some very, very odd choices insofar as the graphic design. I think you can just about see there is actually text written on there, but it's very faint red text on top of a slightly sort of pinkish hue, or, well, it's a black and white image, but it makes it look pinkish hue. But here especially, that is red text on top of a pink image, and it's very, very small. I couldn't make out half of what it said, and I don't blame other people if they can't either. As far as the records themselves go, you've got inside with side A and B, you've got a little thank you sheet with some illustrations, I believe Wes Borland's own illustrations, and then just the records themselves. Nothing too fancy with these. They are just a regular black vinyl. You know, it's about the music rather than the colour on this one, I'm afraid. But yeah, like, it's a nice gatefold. It feels high quality. It's a lovely record to have as well. I think for me, this is kind of one of those ones, you know, having grown up listening to them and kind of drawing so much influence, especially from Wes Borland as far as his approach to music. This for me is something that I always wanted to have in my collection, and, you know, I eventually was able to pick it up. It's not the easiest thing to find, and it's not necessarily the cheapest thing to find. There are copies floating out there. I didn't pay too above the odds for this, but, you know, it's, as far as I'm aware, there's no sort of current print out there that's kind of in circulation, so you'll have to try and find like a new old stock or a pre-owned copy. I was able to get a sealed one, which I'm very pleased with. But yeah, if you are picking it up, have a look on Discogs or eBay for the most likely shot at getting hold of it. Give it a listen, give it a chance, and, you know, if you're not willing to give the entire album a listen, really recommend Rearranged, Don't Go Off Wandering, No Sex. Those three. If you think you know what Limp Bizkit is and you haven't heard those tracks, I think they may surprise you. Those tracks are, as I said, genuinely emotional. They are quite deep and quite somber tracks in many ways, and musically they are excellent. So I'll say it one more time, give them a chance. They are a cracking band. I'm glad they're getting the recognition they deserve these days. I hope to see more from them in the future. You know, they're still producing today. They've made some bangers recently as well. They seem to almost be like on a new lease of life, which is great to see with their sort of like tenure in the industry. So hopefully a lot more to come, but at the very least we will always have an absolute banger in this one. Thank you very much.